whatever, non-religious, atheistic, whatever. It matters not where you go. The representation across the world has been usurped by the very fact these central banking systems exist everywhere. We also understand that they have to exist everywhere, and therefore solution is perceived as an enemy of usury, because if one free system existed, it would prove the huge disparities and the huge injustices of usury.
Yeah.
So what you're arguing for is something that will never happen. We didn't get a country here by just continually appealing to the English monarchy until we compromised principle to such a degree that the king decided he would award us the compromise just so we might have had some ostensibly moral victory in name only. You know, we said no.
The financial crisis has proved, a catalyst for more people talking about it, and when more people understand these issues. I'm not saying they will, but I'm just saying when more people do.
Oh, they will. They will. Simon, I talk to people. In fact, I contracted pneumonia in Denver at this convention, and I keep track of actually how many dissenters there are, how many people are just disinterested, and how many people are converts, and how many people are ready converts. And I talk to hundreds and hundreds of people about mathematically perfected economy over the weekend. And it was the convention was there's a predominant number of Native Americans there, and Native Americans are particularly conducive to understanding the crimes of banking and their solution. Mm-hmm. And being as there was a predominant number of Native Americans here, in all the hundreds of people that I talked to, almost everyone there fell in the category of immediate convert. Not only were they immediate converts, I talked to person after person whom, when you began to explain a vital principle, they immediately understood where it was going. They were steps and steps and steps ahead of explanation. It was phenomenal. In the whole convention, I spoke to two people who were, let's not say opposed to mathematically perfected economy, but indisposed to recognize that we even had a problem. One person was a fellow I met at breakfast one day who joined our table and listened with many other people to my quick explanation of causes of our problems, the present failure, and their singular solution. Everybody else at the table just went away, flabbergasted, realizing they'd heard the gospel on it. This guy did too. But I ran into him later, and he'd asserted, it was actually, I sat down across from this guy, which is what engendered this discussion, and, he asserted that the reason that we were in failure was just psychological. That if we maintained faith in the system, and just kept spending money, we'd be all right. And I said, there's no way people can spend money. They are overcommitted. The money that the income that they have is, their indebtedness is increasing beyond them. That's why we can't service all the additional debts that the government's accumulating. They would have to increase taxes if it was even possible for us to tread water. I said, you're wrong. And then, so I explained this to the whole table, and everybody was, the fact that he said this was, everybody's talking about the economy now. Somebody said something. I wasn't even trying to bring up mathematically perfected economy at breakfast. So we got like 20 people, who take off and have heard this. Well, I run into this guy 2 days later, and he after a complete sufficient explanation, he's reverted to his. So I was, how you doing at this show? I said, and he said, well, he was his product, his marketing was going. he said it was good. Nobody had good reports, and then he said if you just keep the positive attitude, it'll work. I said no, pal. And his name was John, and I said it can only get worse because the artificial indebtedness can only be multiplied. I explained it to him again. But he's one of the two cases who was, let's just say, indisposed to understanding. The other was a very, very ignorant woman. She brought up something, and she claimed that the Denver area was not even in decline like the rest of the country, that they were leading the way out of recovery. My jaw dropped, and I said, excuse me, how can you claim that? She heard it on the news or something somewhere, and she had no answer at all. I says, first of all, how can you even maintain a vital circulation subject to interest when you're obligated to pay principal and interest out of a circulation which at most is comprised of some remaining principal, and you can only maintain the vital circulation by borrowing that back then as an ever greater sum of debt perpetually increased by so much as periodic interest on an ever greater sum of debt. The principal you pay out of circulation has to be reborrowed as new debt equal to the old that would otherwise be resolved, thus making it mathematically impossible to pay down the sum of debt. And the interest that you're paying out of circulation didn't even count against the former sum of debt, and therefore increases the sum of debt perpetually. So the situation hasn't gotten better. How can you claim it's gotten better unless you can prove that the sum of debt has decreased? Has the sum of debt decreased in relation to your income? And she just stood there speechless.
Yeah,
but
I think the answer to that is we've got to find a much simpler way of communicating. Those
are the only. Well, maybe you can, but in 40 years, that's the situation. Expressed in its simplest possible terms, and nothing less comprises, understanding. Ellen Hodgson Brown plagiarizes me saying all this amounts to a Ponzi scheme. Okay, when her followers, supporters, throw that at me, I asked them, and no one, like this woman, no one has been able to answer yet. Ponzi scheme, I say. Can you tell me from the definition of a Ponzi scheme what our problem is and how to solve it? Absolutely no one can answer that question because it's impossible. First of all, the process doesn't equate to a Ponzi scheme. It has similar consequences, but they're only similar. They're not the same, and the means of determining them is different. And we don't join this voluntarily. It's been imposed upon us. We can't but suffer these terminal consequences because these central banking systems and the obfuscation of the currency which they represent are imposed upon us. All money comes into circulation.
I guess it's just a language that people can understand when it amounts to the same thing.
I disagree with this. In fact, I could provide you with, I'm just going to cite it off the top of my head. I had, through the 1990s, I had numbers of groups of people who wanted me to dumb my message down for the masses. Now, I have many author friends who have tangled with me over this as well. And when it's ever come down to proving their assertion that I speak too complicated or over the top of people's heads, no one has reduced this to simpler terms by which you can understand it. Sure, we can make similar examples and whatnot, but they don't emulate it. Now, there was a group of educators in Alaska who wanted to do this, and we took a single article as an example. We spent 6 months haggling over it, and never produced an article that could be better understood, had less words, which expressed the same vital, indispensable things. We failed. 6 months of intensive effort dedicated to revising a single article that already exists. In fact, take my parable of perfect economy. It's a perfect example of right and wrong. There's actually 2 different cases in there. And the second case of funding government without taxation, I planted in there as a purposed fault. And that's where this money is debt thing, this objection to money being a debt, comes from. J. Coran popularized it, and all the people, since J. Coran plagiarized me, who've read the article, and there's, in the mid-90s, 1995, I had 100,000 visitors a month to my website, personal web pages, people reading. This was one of the most important articles. And an example of how far that plagiarism has gone is just like in the last 3 years. I had to get a copy of, Franklin's Nature and Necessity of a Paper Currency, and I'm working on OS 10 right now, and I've also run Windows in a virtual machine, but I didn't have Windows booted up, and I've got the copy of the paper, that I've had for so long on the Windows side. Well, I didn't want to boot up my virtual machine and get that, so I just go Google it real quick and go back to the University of Virginia site and grab an original copy. Well, I got my Google search, to return 100 results per page, because typically, I may need that, and rather than set up it on a situation by situation basis, I just run it that way. So anyway, I get 12 results for the search 3 years ago. I'm just looking for Nature and Necessity of a Paper Currency by Benjamin Franklin, exactly where I know it needs to be. So a few keywords and I'm there. I get 12 results for that search. Nobody's interested in Nature and Necessity of Paper Currency. Just a few months ago, I was in the exact same situation. I didn't have my Windows site booted, wanted to copy the paper, going to go to the University of Virginia educational site, do a Google search. 25,400,000 returns from the same Google keywords. Right all the way down the first page are people with websites, web pages, claiming that Benjamin Franklin prescribed a perfect economy. That comes from the second case in which I embedded a fault. The perfect economy is described in the first example. What's wrong with the second example, I've explained to you. There isn't an obligation to pay the money out of circulation, and it's only rightly applied to those who consume of whatever's created. That's what's wrong with the second example. It's inflationary to fund government without taxation. And this is what is actually, I was required to respond to this original lecturer in Alaska in early spring of 1975 who presented this proposition wrongly, and I explained what was wrong. But in any case, this idea comes from my work. That article has existed in the public domain since 1979. I used it in my documentation to the Reagan administration. So it's been online 10 years since there was an internet in 1984. And it's also been online in my work since 1993. But nobody was advocating just spending money into circulation. I was sent to a plagiarist site just a couple of days ago. And it turns out to be, of all people, Michael Rivero, who I wrote many years, better than 10 years ago, to get him interested in this, and now he's basically emulating my work. But he's advocating spending money into circulation. That's wrong, wrong, wrong. Why are people making this mistake? When I would tell this story, and you should read that page, Parable of Perfect Economy. When I would tell people this story, I would finish, and they would just be amazed that Benjamin Franklin had said all this so long ago, and that he had shown how to fund government without taxation, much less this accumulation of debt. People would cry often when I would tell this story. I'm serious, And so what happened, is when J. Coran plagiarized me, he takes my story, which isn't even a historic event. I had produced an original account of this, and academia denied that Franklin ever said these things, that this meeting ever existed, that Jefferson had said other things. They challenged me on it. And the truth is, I looked for sources for this stuff, never found them, and decided ultimately to put this in a parable, which I explain in the beginning is not true history. But I did this ambiguously because I didn't want to do it I didn't want to ruin the impact of the story, which had become a tremendous teaching vehicle. When you got to the end of it, there was an addendum that explained that asked, as I would when I use this verbally, what was wrong, would tell you what was wrong, and tell you why you couldn't do that.